Welcome to this week's video update from the Iowa State Capitol. As I promised last week, I'm going to go into a little bit of detail this week about the state's balance sheet. Now, the state's budget is one of the more complicated things that we deal with. Obviously, in a $6+ billion budget, there's a lot of ins and outs, and it can be really difficult to understand. One of my roles as the ranking member of the House Appropriations Committee is to really look at the big picture of the budget and how the state should prioritize its spending. So I put together a little information to kind of give you some background on how the state spends its money. So we'll begin with the current fiscal year 2012. For fiscal year 2012, the total funds available are $6.393 billion. That number is given to us by the Revenue Estimating Conference, which is a nonpartisan committee of three folks that meet on a regular basis, gauge different factors in the economy, and determine how much revenue will be available. Last year, the legislature approved a budget of $5.999 billion, leaving an ending balance of $394 million. So the first thing that happens with the ending balance is the cash reserve fund is filled. Now, the cash reserve fund is determined to be full at 7.5% of the total funds available, which for fiscal year 2012 is $468.5 million. So $22 million of the $394 million ending balance goes in the cash reserve fund. Next, the economic emergency fund is filled. That's limited at 2.5% of total funds available. So for fiscal year 2012, that number is $156.2 million. So $8 million of the 394 goes to the Economic Emergency Fund. Next, the state fills the Taxpayer Trust Fund, pays what's called performance of duty, and makes other various expenditures. And for fiscal year 2012, that number is $74.7 million. That leaves us with an excess of $290.5 million at the end of fiscal year 12. Last week, House Republicans released their budget targets for fiscal year 13. Now, these are the overall spending limits that they have imposed on themselves for the different areas of the budget, which we talked a little bit about during last week's video update. So I thought I'd take the House Republican targets and run them through the same calculations as we just did with the fiscal year 2012 numbers. The total funds available for fiscal year 2013, again, determined by the Revenue Estimating Conference, is $6.541 billion. The House Republican budget targets this year total $6.104 billion, leaving an ending balance of $477 million. First, as we did with the fiscal year 2012 numbers, we fill the cash reserve fund. So for 2013, that means adding $21.5 million to max the cash reserve fund at $490 million. Next, we fill the Economic Emergency Fund. That means we'll add $7 million. After the Economic Emergency Fund, the state fills the Taxpayer Trust Fund, pays an estimated, obviously, performance of duty number, because that number is a year out in the future, which we calculate to be about $88 million. All of this means at the end of fiscal year 2013, House Republicans intend on leaving an excess of $360.5 million. Now, I asked the state treasurer what kind of return we get on cash investments. Obviously, these investments need to be relatively liquid in order to meet ongoing obligations of the state. The state treasurer informed me that the state makes 0.2% interest on available cash balances. And we've actually run into a situation where financial institutions are starting to threaten to make us pay for them to park our cash. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, and I think most Iowans agree, that spending money on a problem doesn't always mean you're going to solve it. But the state budget is a reflection of our priorities. And in this case, the House Republicans' budget is not a reflection of the priorities that I hear from Iowans. In particular, Iowans are focused on job creation, strengthening the economy, and doing whatever we can to improve our schools. Now, I'm going to highlight a few of the Republican budget targets that I don't think meet that goal. First, in the area of education, House Republicans propose to spend $82 million less than the governor and $34 million less than last year. Now, I don't believe that at the beginning of a bipartisan effort to strengthen our schools and improve student achievement, that we should begin by yanking the rug out from under school districts, schools, principals, teachers, students, and their families. Jobs is another bipartisan priority of the legislature this year. Republicans propose to spend $32 million less than Governor Branstad this year, including zero funding for the High Quality Jobs Program, which Governor Branstad has identified as the successor to the Values Fund. That represents a real cut of $6 million over last year. Again, not the way to strengthen the economy and make sure that Iowans have the skills that they need to fill those job openings. Now, as we work through the rest of the legislative session, I'm looking forward to working with House Republicans and the Senate and the Governor to put together a consensus budget that meets the priorities of Iowans and moves the state forward.